opportunities for black people in terms of private enterprise and pursuing the American dream, which had been denied them access to the American dream and building businesses and things like that. And the women's movement started under Dick Nixon.
I agree with
Yeah,
you.
the women's movement started
Yeah.
under Dick Nixon. The Indian movement started under Dick Nixon. The EPA was developed under Dick Nixon. I mean, it goes on. All these wonderful things that Nixon did is just like Trump. They've all been suppressed. They've all been overlooked because they don't like him. He's not likable. He's a real guy. He hurt my feelings. Like this little Chinese girl, this little Chinese woman, the reporter. These people and the black women reporters, and the white women reporters. They ask such nasty questions, and they ask questions so disrespectfully to the president. And then when he comes back at him, they go, "Oh my God, he talks to me." Well, you didn't think about how you spoke to the president of the United States. Sometimes I just want to walk back
That's
there and
right.
slap him and go, "You're talking to the president of the United States, honey." I don't care if you like him or dislike him. He's the president of the United States. But anyway, I'm
Well, that's
sorry.
a good
I didn't mean to
point. Yeah.
digress.
Well, look, yeah, they talk about Trump, not being calm and
Right.
starting fights and
Right.
everything. Well, guess who started the fight?
They did.
He didn't have the pussy protest when he came into office.
Right.
That was somebody else
Right.
was doing that, and it kept going from there.
Yeah, but I think when I look at the vitriol that's directed toward a president, I think the guy with the most vitriol has been Trump, then Nixon, and then Reagan. 3 Republican presidents. All because they don't fit the mode of, we're just going to turn this country around and we'll just do whatever we want to do. If we think it, so it is. If we can think it, what did Jesse Jackson used to say? If you can conceive, then you believe, or some craziness. But Jesse Jackson was the original rapper. People don't really
That's right.
understand
That's
that.
right. Yeah, exactly. Everything he said rhymed. So,
Yeah, everything he said
exactly.
rhymed. I mean, this guy, and the thing is, he's never been a pastor. He was never ordained. He never finished seminary. And the Reverend Jesse Jackson. I'm going, wait, whoa. Call me the Reverend Charles Butler. I mean, I took a test on the internet, and when I finished the test, it said you are now confirmed as the Reverend Dr. Charles Butler. The Right Reverend Dr. Charles Butler.
That's right. Yeah. Well, Jesse did pretty well for himself.
Yeah, he has.
Basically shaking down corporations and saying, I'm going to protest you unless, gosh, I'm a consultant to your company. So
Right.
he did pretty well. It's a strange part of the American dream. I would rather have people do things that are actually helped give us goods and services. I'd feel a lot better about him if he served the armed force.
Yeah, but he was
Invented a widget or just sold widgets or fixed widgets.
Yeah, well, the guy was a poverty pimp, and the bottom line is he sold black people out, and we let him. Anyway, so look, let's get back to and let's focus a little bit on what happened with DOJ dropping these charges against General Flynn. I agree that they should have been dropped. There's no question that Flynn was. He was, what do you guys call it? Entrapped. So they get him in the room and they ask him these questions. Yeah, they get
Right.
they entrap him in these questions, and then they say, "Oh, by the way, if you don't agree to do what we asked you to do, we're going to put your son in jail. And oh, by the way, if that's not enough." We're going to charge you with treason, even though you had a legitimate business and you were doing business legally. We're going to make it seem like you were a Russian spy. I mean, these people, that happened to a buddy of mine. This guy ended up doing 36 months in a federal pen. And all the federal prosecutors told him he had to say was that Todd Strozier, who was the president of Cook County, had taken money. He said, I don't know if he's taking. So this is Gene talking. I never saw Todd take any money. Mm-hmm. I don't know anything about that, but I can tell you I didn't take any money either. But because he wouldn't say what the prosecutors wanted him to say, they put him in jail. And the judge was right in the middle of it. They put him in jail for 36 months for a crime they never proved he committed.
Well, that's right. And with Flynn, there's such power with Mueller having all these lawyers and able to just string this out indefinitely, as it was, I think, Flynn's legal bills, even with pleading, were something like $650,000. Now, this is a guy who served our country, is not making a lot of money, and all of a sudden, the government is forcing him to spend $650,000 for really a ticky-tack Mickey Mouse crime, if it's a crime. And I think technically he may have committed a crime, technically, but there were so many ethical violations by the government. First of all, in entrapping him into the crime, it isn't maybe strict entrapment, but it's spiritual entrapment. It's unethical entrapment. And then after they prosecute him, they don't give him what they call Brady material, which is anything that's exculpatory, the prosecution has to turn over. Now, the prosecutors didn't do that. They had all kinds of information that we're getting now in 2020 when Flynn's out, is being investigated and charged in 2017. And we're just getting it now. The notes say they're trapping him. The notes, the fact that the FBI reports were altered several times by Peter Strzok. The fact that the other guy had notes that said, what are we trying to do? Get him fired, trap him into lying. They had agreed, and they'd done all this leaked stuff to sort of force him to lie by saying that they were going to prosecute Logan Act violations when they know that they really couldn't prosecute Logan Act violations. Then they were going to get Flynn, fearing that it was a Logan Act violation if he said he talked to Kislyak about sanctions. He would be violating the Logan Act, so therefore he probably soft-soaped it a little bit. Well, I don't remember what I said there, if I talked about that or not. Probably, technically, to be honest, probably he was fibbing there, but the point is the government shouldn't be asking that. The government knew what he said on the tape. They were just trying to trap him into something. You don't prosecute somebody for that. I was a prosecutor. You don't prosecute somebody for lying to the government if you already know the answer to it. Okay, that's number one. It's just something that's unethical. Everything they did, they probably did 6 or 7 things wrong. And Charles, one of the things that I'd like to talk about, adding on to that, is when they're talking about Flynn the first time in January 5th, 2017, and I think this is real important for your listeners. When they're sitting there, they're not only plotting about Flynn, and that's been talked about, but they're also plotting about how to withhold information from the incoming administration about national security matters, specifically about the Russian collusion investigation, and they're planning on withholding it from Donald Trump, who the Constitution says is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, commander-in-chief, and charged with national security matters, national security information from him. Remember, this Russian collusion investigation was not an attorney general investigation, as you would with a criminal case. So Nixon obstructed a criminal case under the Attorney General's jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. This investigation was not a criminal investigation. It was a counterintelligence investigation, which is a presidential investigation. And who has to see that information but the president, who's got authority over that matter? And these people are sitting there in the Oval Office plotting as to how not to fully disclose that information to them. It's right in Susan Rice's memo. After the meeting,
Groudy seemed
they did not disclose.
Well,
fully.
remember,
so one.
What did Trey Gowdy was on television last night with Tucker, and he said something about that there's part of the memo that's classified that we would know exactly what Biden and Obama knew when this document is unclassified. He said that information is classified right now. Did you?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's true.
So what?
But one of the things, yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, to me, there is going to be some good stuff that comes out, but as far as I'm concerned, we have enough right now to know that they were discussing the subject of whether or not and how much, whether and how to withhold information from the incoming administration. Now,
but what would be the purpose? What would be the purpose, John? What would be the purpose to hold back?
To trap people, to hurt Trump. Hurt Trump. There's no other reason than to hurt Trump. And they had this woman, Evelyn Farkas, who admitted it later on. She sort of bragged about it. Oh, we wanted to make sure that the whole world knew that Trump had done all these terrible Russian things and that he couldn't bury things, and we're going to try to do things to make sure he didn't bury things. What they're really saying is we want to pursue this investigation without Trump knowing about it. And we're going to try to do an end around. They were already in the process, remember, of getting Jeff Sessions to recuse himself. That was part of the plot. You get Jeff Sessions to recuse himself. Guess who advised him how to do that? People right under Sally Yates. They decided, oh my gosh, Attorney General Sessions, you got to recuse yourself. Now it goes to Rod Rosenstein, who's one of their guys, who's sort of a holdover. So Rosenstein now is in charge of it. So now we've successfully done an end around the Attorney General, and now we're doing an end around Flynn by getting rid of Flynn and then telling Trump, oh, you got to fire Flynn, so Trump fires him. Then they're keeping things from Trump. So this is that they've done it very methodically, keeping information away from people, and especially from a guy like Flynn, who would have cut their knees off. He knew exactly what was going on. If he would have been told about this Russian investigation, he knew where the bodies are buried, and he would have cut them off at the knees. That's why they had to get rid of Flynn. So he was number one on the hit list.
Okay.
But my general overall analysis is here is one thing you can say very clearly, without a doubt, about an investigation from a person in charge of the investigation. That's black and white, obstruction of justice. Those people in that meeting should all be prosecuted. Now, would I bet any money that they're going to be prosecuted? No. I'm not a fool. They're not going to prosecute any of those people for that. Now, hopefully they'll prosecute people for the lies they told to the FISA court. That's probably the best bet. But and I think they did that, and people didn't. So the only question is, Comey and McCabe, for example, are now talk about how they were 7 levels above it. Boy, they didn't know everything that was being said. That's their defense. Everybody's running for the woods, but there are some people that are going to get left holding the bag. Hopefully it's McCabe or Comey. I don't think they'll get Comey on this, but they may get Brennan. They may get Peter Strzok. Those are probably the 2 best targets, I think.
Well, this was a bad deal for Peter. Peter lost his girlfriend. Peter lost his extra piece in this.
Job.
And Mr. Peter, I'll stop the president, honey. Just, can we meet in the hotel tonight? Can we get away to that Motel 6? And I'll tell you how I'm stopping the president from being the president. Man, that's some pretty heady stuff.
Tell you my thought. Yeah. Well, yeah, and what I love about it is I love about it that we have a counterintelligence guy who's so stupid that he doesn't realize that people are going to read his text messages, and he thinks that that's immune from the government finding out. He's not a very good counterintelligence guy, and if we didn't have those text messages, we wouldn't know half of this stuff. I mean, thank God for those 2 lovebirds deciding they're going to be doing their texting.
Well, she cut him off. She cut the dude off, man.
That's
he lost
the greatest punishment you can have.
Yeah.
He got his side piece.
He got his side piece cut off, man. It's like, but don't call me anymore. Don't text me anymore. It's over. You're not gonna get any more of this, Peter.
Yeah.
And your little Peter.
Yeah.
You can't make.
Guy's been hit.
Wait a minute. You can't make this stuff up. I always say that I always say
You
that.
really can.
I always say that the truth
Yeah.
and history is far more fascinating than fiction. And people don't really get that because they don't, they would rather read something that somebody pulled out of their mind and made up than to read real history. Like a buddy of mine, this guy, he was on yesterday with me, a guy named Dan Perkins. Dan is an interesting guy. He wrote a trilogy about terrorism and things like that. Everything that he wrote in his trilogies came true. But his last book was about a pandemic that struck America. And he wrote that book a year ago. And about how
Oh,
America
that's
was,
pretty good.
yeah,
That's
how
pretty good.
America was locked down, and oh man, it's horrible. I had to put the book down, because it was so depressing and scary. And I swear to God,
Yeah,
everything that he
exactly.
laid out is exactly what we're going through right now. We don't know when the
Yeah,
account. We
yeah,
don't know when
yeah.
we'll
There,
be
there
able
was.
to go to school. Who ever heard of that? When did that ever happen? Where children didn't know when they were going to school. We don't know when we'll play baseball again. When we'll play football again. All of the college football schedules have been canceled because we're gonna be under attack by the coronavirus. Well, not let Bill Gates tell it. Bill Gates just sunk. And these are the tidbits I throw in. Bill Gates just sank
Yeah.
$384 million in a company called Norvad, Norvax. And yeah, folks, for you out there, you're getting in
Huh.
a little late. I got in early, so I got that big bump. I got a 65% increase on my stock, so I almost got back what I put in. But anyway, man, I almost doubled my
Yeah.
outlay, dude. I mean, but Gates had invested in a company called BioNTech. It's a German company that makes vaccines, and they've been working on a vaccine for COVID-19. So how are they so far ahead of the curve? Hello.
That's a good question. How are
So
they?
yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
I think that Gates. I think that this is something that Gates is part of. He's a little nerdy. I'm not impressed with the fact that he's a billionaire. He's always been a weird guy. I think he's a weird person. He's talked about, well, he can end climate change. We just need to kill a few million people. And the world will be a better place. I mean, I didn't say that. Bill Gates said it. But this Judge Sullivan, I'm really surprised that Judge Sullivan decided that he would take amicus briefs after denying them for the last 2 years.
Well, I think he's thinking that maybe he's going to not grant the government's motion, or at least, let me put it this way: I hope what he's doing is, I hope he's just trying to give everybody their hearing. There probably are a lot of people yelling and screaming at him. A lot of people are saying this is a terrible abuse of the process. That is to say, Barr's abusing it. Not that they were abusing him, that the Flynn's prosecutors were abusing it, but the hope would be that he would look at this very carefully and said, something, I agree with Barr. Now, I'm afraid that he may not do that. I'm afraid that he's asking for amicus briefs because he's thinking about not granting the government's motion. I hope he doesn't do that. He's got the power not to grant it, but I hope he doesn't do it because I think the government acted so poorly here. Because we always said in the U.S. Attorney's Office that, it's better let 99 men go free than convict one innocent man. And you got to do it right. You got to hit hard blows. We got to hit fair ones. And the government was not taking fair blows here. And they should be criticized for it, and this thing should be dismissed.
Well,
Every ethical norm was violated here.
but now, what background? What's Judge Sullivan? What's his background?
I don't know that because he's been on the bench for a while. He was on the bench with for the Stevens case, And I really should look at that. I don't know whether he came in under a Democrat or Republican. Frankly, he's always been sort of a maverick, a wild card. Just from looking at him earlier, and I remember researching his background. I don't remember it now. But when the argument first came up, I think there was a scope issue as to the scope of Rosenstein's granting of power to Mueller, and I think Sullivan went ahead and ruled in favor of Mueller on that one. But I don't know. But he is a maverick. He's kind of a wild card. He's very forceful. I think he's a Democrat, but I may be wrong on that.
I'm pretty sure he's a Democrat. But how is his rulings held up at the next level? That's what I want to know. I'd be interested to find out how his rulings have held up on appeal. And I don't know that.
Well, here's the problem.
What's
we've
that?
Got the D.C. Court of we've got the D.C. Court of Appeals,
Right.
which has traditionally been very, very liberal.
Right.
So done pretty well. Let's put it this way: if you rule liberally in D.C. at the district court level, you're probably going to get upheld by the D.C. Court of Appeals.
Right.
So he's probably has a good record there. And I'll tell you, probably if he does rule not to dismiss the Flynn case, I think the D.C. Court of Appeals would probably uphold him. And I think his only shot would be the Supreme Court. And it's a tough one. It's a tough one because in these matters, you usually give discretion to the trial judge. And there's one principle here is you give discretion to the trial judge on matters like this, on matters of misconduct, ethics. Mm-hmm. The other principle is that these guys violated every ethical rule known to man. But normally things that the trial judge looks at and you kind of give him power. And if you're a fairly conservative lawmaker, if I were on the appellate courts, I would give a lot of discretion to the judges below me and let them do their thing because it's kind of the way you're supposed to do it. You're not supposed to overrule the guy unless he's clearly wrong. And so you might say, gee, I disagree with him, but he's not so wrong that as a matter of law I can overturn him. So the odd thing here you find is that sort of what I would call more left-leaning judges more likely assert their own opinions into things. If you're fairly conservative, you kind of give discretion to other people. You don't try to act like you're the most knowledgeable person that's ever been born and insert your own judgment in place of either the judgment of the legislators or of the courts below. So in a way, conservative people get hurt by the system, even though they're probably running it the right way. And so what I would say is if he rules this way, I'll disagree with him, even though I would probably say you have the power to rule that way.
Right.
I kind of feel bad. The one thing that is really bothersome, Charles, is that they had all this information. And this is one thing that the Supreme Court might stick in their craw as well as the Court of Appeals. They didn't give the guy his Brady material. Brady versus Maryland, you got to give all the material that is exculpatory or is favorable to the defendant. There was a whole raft of stuff they didn't give Flynn,
right,
including the fact that Peter Strzok, changed the report 3 times. They didn't give him the notes of Bill Priestap saying that they were basically saying they were entrapping the guy. There's a whole host of stuff they didn't give him. The agents didn't think he was lying. They didn't tell him that. The whole thing was a big plot. They'd done all this coordinated leaking to kind of get him to do what they're doing. They planned on not telling the White House about the FBI agents visiting him. Comey's admitted that in a very smarmy way. So every ethical precept has been violated, but the Brady versus Maryland one is the one that a court could really sink its hooks into here and say, okay, normally I give the court discretion here, but we've got a Brady violation, and just based on Brady, we think we can intervene and overturn the conviction, even though Sullivan may not. Now, I'm hoping Sullivan overturns it.
Right.
But even if he doesn't, the Brady issue might be one that the upper courts would take a look at.
Okay.
So I'm hopeful that happens if he rules against him. So there is hope, even if
Well,
Sullivan rules the other way.
his
I like the fact that he let Stevens go.
Ted Stevens.
Yeah, I'm happy that he did that. That he was upset about that and dismissed that case when he found out that what the government had done there.
Yeah, well, Ted was lucky because I think Ted was a crook.
He might have been. But the question is whether they did it the wrong way. And, the guy that prosecuted him was this Andrew Weissman guy who was, leading the charge with Mueller's office here. So he's got a record of being a bit too aggressive for a government lawyer. Maybe it's okay in a private firm, but not as a government lawyer.
Well, it's interesting. Maybe he's auditioning. But, what people don't know is that you were Deep Throat's lawyer.
Yeah. I figured out who Deep Throat was back in '76, and this was just one of the things I did in my spare time out here. Maybe I had too much of it, but I think I thought about it a lot, thought I could figure it out, and then lo and behold, 25 years later, I'm sitting at my dining room table where I am right now, and my daughter's got her friends from Stanford University in, and I'm talking about my dad's escapades as an FBI agent, and this one kid across the table from me said, "Well, my grandfather was an FBI agent. Maybe you knew your father." And he said, "My grandfather's name is Mark Felt. Maybe you've heard of him." I said, "Nick, now I've heard of him. He's Deep Throat. Can I come up and talk to him?" So we hit it off. I came up the next Sunday and talked to him. It took us about 3 years.
So how did you know Mark was
talk about it and get it out?
How did you know Mark was Deep Throat?
Well, I talk about it in my book Postgate a little bit. You can go through circumstantially and take all the rich vein of hints that Woodward had in the book, and you can start narrowing it down. Who knew this? Who knew that? Who would have done this? This information had to come from the prosecution side, so you could narrow it down to Justice Department, and then you could narrow it down and say, well, it's more likely FBI than the prosecutors. Then you can say, well, the FBI guys, these guys got transferred out of town. These guys knew this, So basically, by '76, I had everything eliminated and said, okay, bingo, it's Mark Felt. So, and I was doing a lot of the same stuff that Mark Felt had done during Watergate. And I had a case involving Jimmy Carter was paying off the black ministers in Oakland to support him from the pulpit. One of them, we might have talked about this with Martin Luther King, one of the pastors over here got the money from Carter's campaign, but didn't divvy it up with the other black ministers around.
Right.
So one of those ministers got really upset and told the reporter. He said, hey, I'm supposed to get my payoff from Reverend X, and I didn't get it. He kept it all himself. And the reporter said, what? And so the reporter then reported it to the U.S. Attorney's Office. I did a preliminary investigation and said, yeah, Carter's campaign is paying off black ministers.
Man.
The Justice Department would not let me do that. Yeah.
Well, why was that?
Well, because you had to get Mother May I permission if it's an election law violation. And I think Carter was ahead in the polls at the time, and I think anybody in Washington would have been stupid to tug on Superman's cape. And so I thought it was a very corrupt decision, a very political decision, at least, by this guy in the Justice Department. And I thought about it, Charles, I said, something, I really need political pressure. This is an investigation that should happen in the wake of Watergate, because it's just like the Watergate thing, Now, I didn't think that Carter would go to jail. I thought that, there'd be a slap on the wrist of the campaign, but it should be prosecuted.
Yeah.
It should be investigated and
People
prosecuted.
should know.
So I thought about leaking. Yeah, so I thought about leaking. And then when I thought about leaking to get political pressure all of a sudden the light bulb went on. I said, well, I can't do it. Everybody knows it's going to be me that's leaking. I'm going to lose my job. So I didn't leak. Then I thought, you know something? This is Deep Throat. This is exactly why Deep Throat went to the garage, is because the Justice Department would not give the FBI the ability to prosecute crimes surrounding the burglary. There were all election law crimes for which you needed Justice Department, okay, Mother May I. And Felt wasn't getting Mother May I permission any more than I was 4 years later. So I thought, my gosh, that's what happened here. It had to be Mark Felt, the head of the FBI investigation, was not getting Mother May I permission the same way I didn't get it 4 years later. And that's why he went to the garage with Woodward specifically to leak Woodward that story, which he thought would get the public aroused and the FBI would be able to keep open their investigation. In fact, it worked to a T. The public got interested, and the Justice Department could not shut down that part of the investigation, what they called the dirty tricks part of the investigation. So that's the long way around to saying that's how I figured it out.
Mm-hmm.
And just kept it to myself. I thought, well, who's going to believe, some young lawyer in San Francisco if I write a book about it? Who cares what I think? So I just kept it to myself. And then 25 years later, I run into this guy. And so I went up and talked to Mark and Mark Felt, and he wasn't admitting it, but I admired him so much, and that I knew what he was doing. He was keeping the system clean. He wasn't out to get Nixon. He was there to keep the system clean. And all the young guys that I knew of liked Deep Throat, and all the prosecutors. And when I said that, he realized that the people who cared about law and order understood that Deep Throat was a hero. And
Mm-hmm.
once I got him to understand that, it was like his eyes melted, Charles. It was like I was giving him absolution. It was like I was in a priest in a confessional saying, "Go in peace, your sins are forgiven."
Uh-huh.
And and then he started weakening. His daughter and grandson just were amazed at his reaction to me when I started talking to him like this. It was like, my God, Granddad is Deep Throat.
Well, when he came
they
out,
didn't know it. He had always lied to them. Yeah.
Yeah, is he still alive?
No, he died in 2008,
Okay.
and not in alive. He died. I think he was 95 when he died. Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. But anyway, he was quite a guy, and he actually liked Nixon a lot. I don't think he understood everything that would happen as a result of this, and I think there were probably a lot of things that happened between when he started leaking and what happened to Nixon. But he did want the system to be clean and incorrupt. And he would have been horrified today at what the FBI was doing. He always thought the FBI should turn square corners. People should really go out of their way to be fair. And that's what he always prided himself about. He said, I wore a gun for 33 years and I never fired it once. I'm very proud of that. He always was fair, always supported civil rights, didn't like rounding up anti-Vietnam protesters, refused to do it. He was quite a guy, and he represented the FBI, and he represents really about 99% of the guys that are still there. And it's unfortunate, one of the outcroppings of Watergate is that it became okay for people like Comey to play games with the press,
Right.
and to be politically active.
Right.
And they know they're going to get covering fire from the press, so then they could start playing games for their own personal advancement. That would have frosted Felt. That isn't the way FBI guys were supposed to.
Well,
act.
but
So
Comey
yeah.
Comey isn't a career FBI guy. These guys are what I call appointed FBI guys. And I just don't have a lot of respect for these people
Right.
who are appointed. They didn't go through the FBI Academy. They didn't come with the dedication to be an FBI agent. They got assigned to be, and we have to get back. And this guy, what's his name? What's his name?
Ray.
That they have over there now. Same deal. Christopher Ray.
Yeah.
He's not an FBI agent. We need real FBI agents in these jobs. We need real FBI people, promulgating the system and enforcing the law, because at the end of the day, the FBI is a law enforcement organization. And, Liddy got caught up in the Watergate scandal. And Liddy was a former FBI agent.
Right.
I met G. Gordon.
Right.
I had an opportunity to meet G. Gordon. And he said, Charles, I was the youngest agent in charge in the history of the FBI, and my office was in Gary, Indiana, dealing with the Black Panther Party. And I'm thinking, okay, the Black Panther Party was one thing. What about the Peace Stone Nation? What about the Blackstone Rangers? Those were criminal enterprises. We're talking people talking about registering folks to vote and feeding kids and getting drugs and prostitutes out of a neighborhood, and you're focusing on them while you allow the criminal gangs to run and roam freely and distribute drugs and prostitution and whatever else is going on. Amazing.
Well, that's right. Nobody really liked to do that because you get your hands dirty doing that. But you're right about the ex-agents. Now, I'm an old friend of Bob Mueller's. He and I were in the office together here. He was not an agent, but he worked so long in the U.S. Attorney's Office and was a career prosecutor. He was U.S. Attorney in 3 different districts. And he was so dedicated that I thought that was a real good appointment to the FBI. The guy worked hard, was a pretty straight shooter.
But what about Whitey Bulger?
I don't think he was by the time.
What about Whitey Bulger?
What?
What about the Whitey Bulger episode? Where he had one of his agents. One of his agents decided that he was part of the mob. We have this. Yeah. We've always had, and you're a prosecutor, but think about this for a second.
Yeah.
We've often had, since J. Edgar Hoover. See, J. Edgar Hoover had some issues with the mob because the mob had pictures of J. Edgar Hoover in drag. He and his lover, his male lover. Uh-huh. I've seen those pictures. They're in a book now. I have the book here somewhere. But in fact, it took a guy in England to publish the book because the U.S. publishers would not include those pictures of J. Edgar Hoover dressed up like Little Bo Peep. Serious bonnet, dress, the whole 9 yards. He and his lover, his male lover. So, but the FBI, think about this. The FBI has been spying and focused on creating chaos in the black community since the 1920s. J. Edgar Hoover used to head up the New York Bureau of Investigation. He parlayed that little job because, he rode herd, he thought, over the Harlem Renaissance. Now, you have to remember the Harlem Renaissance. A lot of people don't know this, but anyway, the Harlem Renaissance, where we talk about all of the literary work that came out of it and, this, that, and the other, there was a whole lot of homosexuality around these artists and these people that came out of Harlem Renaissance. So decadent was the period of the Harlem Renaissance that Adam Clayton Powell's father, Adam Clayton Powell Sr., had a movement to suppress homosexuality in Harlem. Serious.
I didn't know that. Did not know that.
Yeah,
oh.
Hoover. Yeah. Oh, it's in his autobiography. I was looking at it the other day. But Hoover, now you had this guy named Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey had a group called UNITA. It was the forerunner of the Nation of Islam, and you had these. And so he had this army, really, this black army. They had uniforms, they had meetings. They were a little army, but they were down south. Garvey was living in New York. because New York was supposed to be the epicenter of the world, and people would send money to Garvey through the mail. So Hoover set up this scheme. He sent these two white guys to sell Garvey two boats to take them to take people back to Africa, take black folks back to Africa. The boats were called the Black Star Line. So these boats were never going to be seaworthy or ocean worthy. So people were sending their money through the mail to buy these boats. And Hoover had the Justice Department charge Garvey with wire fraud, mail fraud, and that's how Garvey went to jail. So Garvey was in jail.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Garvey. Know that.
Yeah, he was in federal jail for 2 years. Then the feds cut a deal with him because entrapment. They cut a deal with him,
right?
Sent him back to Jamaica, and the thing was he could never come back to the U.S. So he left Jamaica and went to London, and the movement never really caught on in London. But he had a big movement here. In fact, when I was in Meridian, Mississippi in flight school, a man showed me his Garveyite uniform. It was a real uniform.
Oh.
Military uniform.
Oh, yeah. Interesting. There's a lot of Marcus Garvey. Yeah, there's a lot of Marcus Garvey sort of trappings out here in San Francisco. A lot of
Oakland.
Things named after him and so forth.
Yeah. He was real.
Yeah.
I mean, the movement was incredible, but why isn't it in the history books? Why don't people really know about it? But anyway, my point is J. Edgar Hoover was the man who constantly created chaos, and same thing, entrapment, lies, deceit in the black community, and he did that through Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement.
Yeah. And the only thing I would add to that's a little wrinkle that people don't know much about is that the Kennedy brothers, especially Bobby, was very concerned about his brother, and Bobby was an ardent anti-communist. If you remember, before he became Flower Child Bobby, he was hard-ass Bobby, and he hated communists. And when he found out there were two guys, I think named Levison and Odell, that hung out with, Levison was a good buddy of the Reverend's, but didn't have an official post with him, but was sort of his thinker. And then there was a guy named Odell that actually had a job for the Southern Leadership Conference, and so Hoover tells the Kennedy brothers, "Hey, King is palling around with some communists."
He was.
The Kennedys try to get him to. He was, and then the Kennedys tried to get him to stop it. But it was Bobby Kennedy who wanted Hoover to wiretap King. Now,
and he did.
And he did wiretap him. But Hoover's assistant, Sullivan, who my client hated, Sullivan was the guy who put together that montage of sex tapes for King and mailed it to his house. His wife opens it up and listens to it and all that stuff. So that abuse. I guess my point is this: the abuse of King by the government, a lot of it was Bobby Kennedy.
Yeah.
He has his share of blame for it. Then what they wanted to do, they loved to point when King, they would tell King, "Oh, Hoover hates you." Well, they were hurting him.
But
too.
but the other side of that,
Hoover didn't. Yeah.
But the other side of that is this, in my opinion, John. The other side of that is this. Martin Luther King should not have surrounded himself with Jewish socialists and communists. The people who befriended him were Jewish, communists, and socialists. Harold Belafonte is nothing but a socialist.
Well, that's
right. So I always say, if you look at black history, you look at the black development, you look at black socioeconomic whatever, black people were doing pretty damn good before the civil rights goddamn movement. We
right.
We were
right.
We had morals, we had values, we had family. Johnson comes in with the programs to destroy the black family, not well meaning at all. These programs destroyed the black family. Pat Moynihan told everybody they would. So you have to say what's really going on here. You look at the tidbits that you shared, the tidbits that I'm sharing, and it becomes full circle. So today we're saying, here in Chicago, 72% of the people who are dying from COVID-19 are black. Well, 90% of the people who are dying from bullet wounds and homicides are black. Okay, in Chicago. So
Right.
nationwide,
Right.
nationwide, black men are 52% of the victims of homicide. Nationwide, black men, who are basically 8% of the population, commit 36% of homicides. So, mass incarceration, I mean, these numbers support incarceration, So, hey, man,
Right.
you and I could talk about so much. We could do a show for the next 20 days.
Oh, yeah. What I'd love to someday, we ought to talk about how I think the black community gets screwed by a bunch of white people, but I don't think it's the white people that everybody recognizes. It's
No,
the Lyndon
it's
Johnsons of the world
Yep.
and the advisors to
Yep.
King that broke up the family.
Yep.
I mean, they had inspectors in St. Louis that would chase out the husband if the husband tried to stay at a public housing unit
Yep.
with the wife.
Yep.
Because they wouldn't let them rent to families. You had
Yep.
to be a single mother. So guess what? There are a lot of single mothers around.
Well, did you ever read
terrible what they did. They aid to dependent children. Same thing.
Did you ever read the book The Color of Law?
I did not. Should I? I might want to do that. Who wrote it?
This is a wonderful book, and they're reading this book in law school now. It's called The Color of Law: A Forgotten History of How Our Government Segregated America. It's written by a guy named Richard Rothstein. Amazing book.
Okay.
Amazing book.
I'm going to pick that. I'm going to pick that up. Because that's.
It talks
right
about
up
what
my
you're
alley.
just talking about, the housing
Right.
projects. It not only did it happen in housing projects, it happened in my neighborhood, where white men came around from the government, I guess, and said to the wives while the husbands were at work, "You can make more money. We can give you more money if your husband's not at home."
Right.
Amazing.
That's right. That's what happened.
Hey, look, man.
That's what happened.
We're at
Well,
the
my
end of the
daughter-
show. Go ahead.
We ought to talk about this more. Yeah.
Your daughter, what? You got a few minutes here. Go ahead.
Oh, I just going to say I got a daughter in L.A. She had been in Miami, but she's a federal public defender.
Mm-hmm.
She's there for life. She's brilliant. Great looking, smart, but she refuses to do anything other than represent impoverished people. And so she could probably talk to you a lot about what she sees
Okay.
in the system. And I think you two would have a great conversation.
I'd love to interview her.
And as conservative as I am, and as left wing as she is, we both agree on these same issues that you and I were talking about.
Because it's true. It's true. How can
so-
you not agree? It's true.
It's true. That's right. Exactly. Exactly.
I mean, yeah, we could disagree if it weren't true,
Yeah, exactly. It's so obvious. It's plain as the nose on your face.
It is.
So, yeah. Well, listen, this has been a great conversation, and one of the things I think we ought to look at as time goes on here is literally what was the Obama administration doing to the incoming Trump administration.
Right.
It's broader now than just some false statements. Now, not just, it's important, false statements to the FISA.
Okay.
Court. Yes, that should be prosecuted. But there was a broader conspiracy
No
going
question.
on right from the Oval Office, and it's really just right in front of us.
Okay,
Isn't
what
it?
we have
Yeah.
to do, is talk about your book. Where do we get your book? And what's the name of it again?
Okay, sure. It is Postgate, How the Washington Post Betrayed Deep Throat, Covered Up Watergate, and Began Today's Partisan Advocacy Journalism. There's a straight line, Charles, between the Watergate deceit in reporting, which I never knew was there,
Okay.
all the way up to the present, Ukraine Gate and Russia Gate. So that your listeners should get that book.
By John
Postgatebook.com
O'Connor, folks.
It's a good place to read all about it. Postgatebook.com.
Postgatebook.com by John O'Connor. Hey, John, thanks, man, so much for being with me. Really appreciate you.
It's been a blast.
It has
Take care
been.
of yourself, Charles.
You too, man.
See you now.
All right. Mr. John Connors, folks. We're going to get ready to get the show off the road and get ready for tomorrow. Tell you, it's a great show. John did a great job. Hope you learned something. Hope we passed on a lot of information. And the things that you don't agree with, those are the things you need to pay attention to. Those are the things you need to go look up. That's what I would suggest. So, yeah. See you tomorrow. Same time, same place. We're going to have John Guandalo with us tomorrow, from former CIA agent. Okay? Have a good one.
And don't you think it's a crime when time after time after time people in the bottom, there's people living in the bottom. Listen to me, see that sister, her shirt was fine, folks she started drinking wine from the bottom. She told me, oh man committed a crime, he's doing time, now she's hanging in the bottom. I seen her out there on the avenue.